Are cryptos going to zero? Well, let's dig in and find out.
The land of Arcadia.
Well, hello there, my friends. Chris Marcus here with you on Friday, May 25th for this week's Arcadia Market Wrap-Up. And came across an interesting story wondering, are cryptos going to zero? Well, let's dig in and find out. So here we have on Silver Doctors, a note from Doug Casey, great Austrian economist, fan of gold and silver, that I've certainly learned a lot from over the years and respect. So it was interesting to see Doug Casey's team says Bitcoin banned and going to zero on this date in July. There is a video here if you want to come Google this story, which again is on Silver Doctors. I'll be watching that a little bit later today, but we do have two key highlights. According to KC Research, on July 21st, they believe Bitcoin and 99.9% of all cryptos will get banned. They've received word of a private meeting that will take place on July 21st, where the 20 most powerful countries on Earth are joining together to discuss cryptos. So what does this mean? Is that possible? Well, I'm guessing that knowing Doug, not personally, but having followed his research, that there's not coming completely out of left field, that I'm sure they've gotten word about something. I don't think they're making that up by any means. Yet, without knowing more, just my initial reaction is that we've been hearing about governments potentially banning cryptos for a couple of years now, certainly picked up last year as the cryptos really took off and got a lot of attention. Again, I'll look forward to watching that video and see if there's any more detail. Yet, my first initial gut reaction, for whatever that's worth, is that even if governments do try to ban cryptos, which certainly could have an impact, yet I wouldn't call it a done deal that they would be successful in doing that. Essentially, the way that I've been thinking about it for a while is that certainly I don't doubt that there are governments that are threatened by what's happening with the cryptos and would like to ban them, yet when you think about what the technology actually does and the productivity that's possible with the cryptos, it would kind of be like banning electricity or cars, where you can do that, but you're going to get left behind and just won't be able to compete on a global economic basis. So, will they try to do that? Also, there's the degree to which will they try and will they be successful? Similar to the silver market, where the governments, what do you call it, the governments or the banks, and to some degree I see them as one and the same at this point, have been suppressing the gold and silver prices through the sale of massive amounts of paper contracts, which has most certainly worked for a while, yet there is a degree to which the market is bigger even than the governments. Certainly when you have governments that have such a stranglehold on so much of life that's going on now, that can take a while. So anyway, I just want to pass this along. Certainly, I still am invested in the cryptos, still think there's a bright future, but at least a few thoughts on that. So on to some other news. Why are governments so concerned about cryptos, especially in the West? Well, here's an update on the China oil futures, also known as the Petro Yuan, which I've discussed quite a bit over the past couple months. It was interesting because, all right, we hear they're going to launch a Petro Yuan in competition to the petrodollar, and certainly there's a large degree that thinks, all right, well, they can do that. It's not really going to make a difference. Yet it is interesting, and I'll read this quote here from Zero Hedge. Since their launch, the Petro Yuan launch in May, the interest in renminbi-backed oil contracts has steadily surged. Trading volumes hit a record 250,000 lots last Wednesday, and the share of yuan contracts in global trading jumped to 12%, compared to 8% in March and 14% of WTI volume, up from 2% in April. So at least some preliminary data showing that adoption is taking place. And is interesting because, as I mentioned in past weeks, you have countries like Iran saying that basically they're done with dollars. And also some of them are large oil producers. Certainly Iran fits into that category. And certainly now the mechanical infrastructure is in place for a lot of these partners who don't want to deal in dollars. We hear a lot about it from China, Russia, Iran, as well as others, now have a place to go. And more importantly than just speculating about it, here we're seeing some data that it is being implemented. So again, just one more reason why I have the concern about the dollar that I do. Now, another story that's been popping up in recent weeks, looks like things aren't going so well in Italy. Here you can see Greek-like crisis fears hang over Italy's markets. A lot happening politically there, of which I will leave it. If you want to dig in a little more, you can Google Italy debt crisis and hear about some of the changes. But how that's even perhaps more relevant is that the Italian 5-year CDS spreads have jumped to a 7-week high of 102 basis points. If you're not already familiar, CDS, credit default swap, which essentially you could think of as insurance on a bond. So when you see spreads jumping, that means basically investors are getting concerned that there could be a default. It's almost surprising to me that you haven't seen a major default in Europe yet. A lot of these countries continue to look in some severe financial distress. Of course, the European Central Bank has been printing a lot of money, which, similar to the US, works for a while until it doesn't. Now, should Italy really go into a sovereign crisis? Again, they wouldn't be the first in this current cycle. Remember, Argentina's already having trouble with their currency again. So you keep piling these on, and as interconnected as the banks are, certainly does increase the probability of some type of Lehman moment. Again, in the news this week was Deutsche Bank that laid off 10% of their staff. There has been continued speculation that they may receive a downgrade, which could be a big problem since they have so many derivatives that are tied to their rating. So whether that triggers a credit event, again, it's not an accident that all of these are happening at the same time. This is the result of what all of these central banks and nations have done over the past decade. Similar to the US, I don't mean to single out the US because this is going on everywhere. Japan, interest rates still at ridiculously low levels. So it's almost wondering what is going to be the spark. But again, that's why, despite Doug Casey's proclamation, I still see great upside in the crypto sector. Gotten beaten up again a little bit this week. Litecoin down to 118 bucks, Bitcoin at 74.31. Yet it was interesting. I actually spoke on a crypto panel this week in the Denver Council of Foreign Relations, and one of the fellows there was more of a technical guy. And I would just say, if you really want to know whether cryptos are a bubble or whether the technology is valid, certainly I can speak to it to some degree from the financial. Yet what I find always interesting is when you speak to actual technology people who are building companies, creating uses for the technology. To me, since the cryptos have been developed, it's been stunning seeing how adamant they are about the possibilities. So yeah, if a government tries to ban it, remember the American government tried to ban liquor in the Prohibition era, and eventually, it's the unintended consequences that usually blow up. So I would imagine even if they tried to do that, I find it hard to see them being in a long-term successful. if there was something like that, could that drive prices down for a while? Sure, that's possible. And on a side note, though, it's kind of strange to me when the governments took on the responsibilities to just start banning things. And what is the justification? I mean, it's like, did they ban the internet? Certainly, I guess China still has large parts of it censored. Yet here's technology, and on what grounds is the government going to come out and say they're banning it? Which is not to say that they won't try that, because governments do a lot of silly things that defy the Constitution or the principles of free markets. But just something to think about it. So if that did happen, I would be stunned and fascinated to hear the justification on that one. And certainly I'll dig into that a little bit more and cover it next week. Lastly, we have the precious metals market here. If we can get Kitco to load, and there it is. Again, gold did cross back over 1,300 an ounce this week. Silver, rather flat, nothing too stunning happening. Although I continue to read reports of accelerated demand, not just for paper, but physical. So while the wait continues, nothing fundamentally changing, and still seems to me that at some point you're going to see the metals react in price action fashion, similar to what you saw the cryptos last year. So if you are looking for a hedge or a great, I mean, it's rare that you have a hedge that can also be a great speculation at the same time and comes with the low risk of being at basically the cost of production. So certainly I still like owning gold and silver at these levels, which is not licensed financial advice, although just hopefully some basic economics that I never saw covered in my time on Wall Street, which is why I'm sharing it here. So with that said, hopefully you found this helpful. Hit the subscribe button and leave your questions below. Hope you have a great weekend. Thanks as always for watching, and we will see you again next week.